Right now, Iran is once again at the center of world attention. Missiles are crossing borders, warships are patrolling narrow seas, oil markets are reacting to every new announcement. Governments in Washington, London, Brussels, and across the Middle East are preparing for consequences that may reach far beyond Iran itself. But here's the first fact most people do not understand. Iran does not need to conquer the world to shake it. It sits beside the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow maritime passage through which around 1/5 of global oil consumption and roughly 1/5 of international liquefied natural gas trade moved in 2024. Few effective alternative routes exist. A prolonged disruption there can affect petrol prices in America, manufacturing costs in Europe, electricity markets in Asia, and food prices in countries thousands of miles away. Iran also holds approximately 208.6 billion barrels of proven crude oil reserves. The United States Energy Information Administration ranks it among the world's 3 largest oil reserve holders and the 2nd largest holder of natural gas reserves. Yet decades of sanctions and underinvestment have prevented Iran from using much of that wealth to its full potential. And today, as conflict surrounds its borders and its coastline, analysts are not merely asking whether Iran can survive. They are asking how much of the global economy could be pulled into the consequences. Credible economic assessments warn that a prolonged regional war would mean higher energy prices, slower growth, disrupted fertilizer shipments, and increased food insecurity, particularly in poorer countries. That is not prophecy. It is the uncomfortable arithmetic of geography. We carried out deep research for this documentary to share carefully verified and authentic historical information with you. Using advanced artificial intelligence technology, we will take you back through the layers of the past. Subscribe to Time Layers for more historical documentaries, because to understand why Iran continues to resist pressure from far greater military and economic powers, we must travel back through the time layers, beginning more than 2,000 years ago. Iran's story begins with its geography. The country is protected by mountains on several sides. The Zagros Range forms a vast barrier in the west. The Alborz Mountains rise dramatically south of the Caspian Sea. Between them lies the Iranian Plateau, filled with deserts, valleys, and isolated regions that have repeatedly made foreign conquests difficult. But Iran is not isolated. It stands at the meeting point of the Arab world, Central Asia, South Asia, the Caucasus, and the Persian Gulf. Ancient trade routes pass through its territory. Armies pass through it. Religions, languages, and technologies pass through it. This combination created Iran's greatest historical advantage and its greatest danger. It was difficult to control, but too strategically important to ignore. That pattern continues today. Iran borders Iraq, Turkey, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. It faces the Caspian Sea in the north and the Persian Gulf and Gulf of Oman in the south. In other words, Iran is not simply a Middle Eastern country. It is a geographic bridge between several different worlds. And by approximately 100 BCE, that bridge was controlled by one of Rome's most dangerous rivals. Around 100 BCE, much of Iran was ruled by the Parthian Empire, also known as the Arsacid Empire. The Parthians were masters of mounted warfare. Their horse archers could attack while advancing, turn suddenly and fire backwards while appearing to retreat. This maneuver became so famous that the expression Parthian shot eventually entered Western languages, referring to a final damaging remark delivered while leaving. But for Roman soldiers, it was not a clever expression. It was a cause of death. In 53 BCE, the Roman commander Marcus Licinius Crassus invaded Parthian territory with a massive army. At the Battle of Carrhae, the Parthian general Surena used horse archers and heavily armored cavalry to destroy the Roman force. Crassus was killed. Thousands of Roman soldiers died or were captured. The defeat became one of the greatest humiliations in Roman history. Rome could defeat kingdoms across Europe, North Africa, and the Mediterranean. But Persia's eastern frontier remained stubbornly unconquered. The Parthians survived for nearly 5 centuries, balancing Iranian traditions with Greek influences inherited from the conquests of Alexander the Great. Their empire often suffered from internal rivalry, but it repeatedly recovered because no enemy found it easy to control the enormous Iranian landscape. Then, in the 3rd century, a new Persian dynasty rose from the south. It would build an empire even more organized, more centralized, and more dangerous. In 224 CE, Ardashir I defeated the final Parthian king and founded the Sassanian Empire. The Sassanians did not view themselves as rulers of another temporary kingdom. They presented themselves as restorers of Iranian greatness. Their rulers adopted the title Shahanshah, meaning King of Kings. They strengthened the government, supported monumental architecture, and closely connected royal authority with Zoroastrian religious institutions. For more than 4 centuries, the Sassanian Empire competed with Rome and later the Byzantine Empire for control of Mesopotamia, Armenia, the Caucasus, and the trade routes connecting east and west. In 260 CE, the Sasanian ruler Shapur I captured the Roman Emperor Valerian, an extraordinary humiliation for Rome. Persian armies later threatened Byzantine cities and, during the final Great Roman-Persian War, pushed deep into imperial territory. Sasanian Iran also became an important center of scholarship, medicine, astronomy, and administration. Its political ideas, court traditions, and bureaucratic methods would survive long after the dynasty disappeared. But continuous wars weakened both the Sassanians and Byzantines. Then, during the 7th century, armies united under the new religion of Islam emerged from Arabia. The weakened Sassanian state collapsed after a series of defeats. By the middle of the 7th century, the last Sassanian ruler had been killed, ending the final great pre-Islamic Persian Empire. Many conquerors might have expected Persian identity to vanish. It did not. Instead, Persia began changing the civilization that had conquered it. The Arab conquest transformed Iran's religion, government, and political order. Over time, most Iranians became Muslim. Arabic became the language of religion and administration across much of the new Islamic world. Yet Persian culture survived. The Persian language evolved into a new written form using the Arabic script. Iranian administrators, scholars, doctors, poets, and philosophers became central figures in Islamic civilization. Persian political traditions influenced the Abbasid Caliphate. Persian literature flourished. The poet Ferdowsi composed the Shahnameh, or Book of Kings, preserving stories of ancient Iranian heroes and rulers. This was one of Iran's greatest historical achievements. It lost its empire, but protected its civilizational identity. Even dynasties of Turkic or Mongol origin frequently adopted Persian language, court culture, and administration after taking control of Iranian lands. The Seljuks ruled through Persian officials. The Mongol invasion caused catastrophic destruction during the 13th century, but the Mongol rulers of Iran eventually established the Ilkhanate, converted to Islam, and became participants in Persian culture. Foreign armies repeatedly conquered Iran. But Iran had an unusual ability to absorb its conquerors, and during the 16th century, a new dynasty would unite much of the country and permanently transform its religious identity. In 1501, the young warrior Ismail I captured Tabriz and declared himself Shah. He founded the Safavid dynasty, one of the most important turning points in Iranian history. The Safavids established Twelver Shia Islam as the official religion of their state. At the time, many inhabitants of Iran followed Sunni Islam. The Safavid transformation was gradual, often forceful and deeply political. It distinguished Iran from its powerful Sunni rivals, especially the Ottoman Empire to the west and the Uzbek powers to the northeast. This religious division still influences Middle Eastern politics today. Under Shah Abbas the Great, Safavid Iran became a major commercial and military power. The capital, Isfahan, was transformed into one of the most impressive cities in the world, filled with mosques, palaces, bridges, markets, and public squares. European merchants, diplomats, and travelers arrived at the Safavid court. Iran traded silk and other goods across an international network connecting Asia with Europe. The Safavid period is often described as the beginning of modern Iranian statehood because it reunited large parts of the Iranian plateau and gave the country a distinct political and religious identity. But prosperity created complacency. By the early 18th century, weak rulers, internal decline, and external pressure had left the empire vulnerable. In 1722, Afghan forces captured Isfahan. The Safavid state collapsed. Then Iran produced one of the most brilliant and ruthless military commanders of the 18th century. His name was Nader Shah. Born into a relatively humble tribal background, Nader rose through war, restored Iranian territory, and drove out invading forces. In 1736, he crowned himself Shah. 3 years later, he invaded the Mughal Empire and defeated its enormous army at Karnal. He entered Delhi and carried away vast treasures, including the famous Peacock Throne and the Koh-i-Noor diamond. For a brief moment, Iran once again appeared to be an expanding imperial power. But Nader's rule became increasingly violent and unstable. He was assassinated in 1747, and his empire rapidly fragmented. After a period of disorder, the Qajar dynasty took power near the end of the 18th century. The Qajars inherited an ancient country facing a new type of threat. Not nomadic armies, not Roman legions, but industrial empires armed with modern weapons, global banks, and commercial companies. During the 19th century, Iran found itself trapped between two expanding powers, the Russian Empire in the north and the British Empire to the south and east. Russia defeated Iran in a series of wars, forcing the Qajar government to surrender territories in the Caucasus. Britain feared that Russian influence in Iran could threaten British India. Iran therefore became a major arena in the geopolitical competition later called the Great Game. Foreign governments gained economic concessions. Iranian rulers borrowed money. European interest influenced trade, banking, telecommunications, and natural resources. The country was never formally colonized like India, but many Iranians believed their independence was being sold piece by piece. That anger helped produce the constitutional revolution of 1905 to 1911. Merchants, intellectuals, religious figures, workers, and reformers demanded limits on royal authority. Iran established a parliament known as the Majlis and adopted a constitution. It was one of the earliest constitutional movements in the Middle East. Then, in 1908, oil was discovered in southwestern Iran. The discovery should have made Iran wealthy. Instead, it created a struggle over who would control the wealth beneath Iranian soil. That struggle would eventually transform Iran's relationship with Britain and the United States. In 1921, the military officer Reza Khan rose to power. By 1925, the Qajar dynasty had been removed and Reza Khan became Reza Shah Pahlavi. He sought to build a powerful, centralized, and modern state. Railways, roads, schools, industries, and government institutions expanded. Tribal power was restricted. The army was strengthened. European clothing and social practices were encouraged, sometimes by force. Reza Shah also promoted Iranian nationalism based partly on the country's pre-Islamic past. In 1935, his government requested that foreign countries generally use the name Iran, which Iranians themselves had used for centuries, rather than Persia. But Iran's strategic location again made neutrality difficult. During the Second World War, Britain and the Soviet Union feared German influence in Iran and wanted to secure Iranian oil and transportation routes. In August 1941, British and Soviet forces invaded. Reza Shah was forced to abdicate, and his young son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, became Shah. Iran was then used as a vital supply route to the Soviet Union. Once again, foreign armies had entered Iran because of its geography. Once again, Iranians were reminded that their country's strategic importance could become a curse. By the middle of the 20th century, Iran's oil industry was dominated by the British-controlled Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, the predecessor of BP. Many Iranians believed Britain was receiving enormous benefits, while Iran received an unfair share. In 1951, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, supported by a powerful nationalist movement and the Iranian parliament, nationalized the oil industry. Britain responded with economic pressure and an international campaign against Mossadegh's government. The crisis unfolded during the Cold War. British officials feared losing control of Iranian oil. American officials increasingly feared political instability and possible Soviet or communist influence. In August 1953, a coup supported by the American CIA and British intelligence helped remove Mossadegh and strengthened the authority of the Shah. Declassified American records confirmed direct United States involvement. For Washington and London, the coup appeared to protect strategic interests. For many Iranians, it became proof that Western governments would oppose Iranian democracy when oil and geopolitical influence were threatened. The memory of 1953 did not disappear. It became one of the emotional foundations of the revolution that would come 26 years later. After 1953, Mohammad Reza Shah became increasingly powerful. Iran received Western military support. Oil revenues funded roads, universities, factories, weapons, and ambitious development projects. In 1963, the Shah launched the White Revolution, a program that included land reform, literacy campaigns, industrial expansion, and voting rights for women. For many Iranians, life improved. Cities grew, education expanded, a large professional middle class developed. But modernization was uneven. Millions moved from rural areas into crowded cities. Inflation and inequality grew. Traditional communities were disrupted. Political parties were restricted, and the security service known as Savak became feared for surveillance, imprisonment, and torture. The Shah increasingly presented himself not merely as a monarch, but as the heir to thousands of years of Persian kingship. In 1971, he organized an extravagant celebration of 2,500 years of monarchy near the ruins of Persepolis. To supporters, it displayed Iranian greatness. To critics, it revealed a ruler celebrating ancient emperors, while ordinary citizens struggled with inequality and political repression. By 1978, protests were spreading across the country. The opposition was not one unified movement. It included religious conservatives, liberals, nationalists, students, workers, leftists, and supporters of democracy. But the most influential figure was the exiled Shia cleric Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. In January 1979, the Shah left Iran. Khomeini returned weeks later to enormous crowds. The monarchy collapsed, and Iran became an Islamic republic. Later that year, students seized the United States Embassy in Tehran and held American hostages for 444 days. The former American ally had become one of Washington's most determined enemies. But the new republic barely had time to consolidate its power before facing an invasion. On September 22, 1980, Saddam Hussein's Iraq invaded Iran. Iraq expected the revolutionary government to collapse quickly. Instead, the invasion produced intense Iranian nationalism. The war lasted almost 8 years. Cities were bombarded, oil tankers were attacked, chemical weapons were used by Iraqi forces. Iranian soldiers and volunteers fought through some of the most brutal battles of the late 20th century. The conflict ended in 1988 without a decisive victory, after causing enormous destruction and loss of life. For Iran's leaders, the war created a permanent lesson. When Iran had been invaded, it believed much of the international community had either supported Iraq or remained silent. From that experience emerged Iran's modern defense strategy. Instead of relying entirely on a conventional air force or army, Iran invested in ballistic missiles, drones, naval mines, fast attack boats, and relationships with armed groups across the region. To Iran's government, these networks created strategic depth and discouraged invasion. To Iran's rivals, they became instruments of destabilization stretching from Lebanon and Syria to Iraq and Yemen. Both interpretations are necessary to understand the conflict. Iran sees deterrence. Its opponents see expansion. Iran's nuclear program originally began with Western assistance during the Shah's rule. After the revolution, it became one of the most disputed security issues in the world. Iran has insisted that its nuclear activities are intended for peaceful energy and scientific purposes. Western governments and Israel have feared that Iran could gain the ability to produce nuclear weapons. Years of inspections, sanctions, secret operations, and negotiations followed. In 2015, Iran and major world powers reached the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. Iran accepted restrictions on uranium enrichment, centrifuges, and nuclear material in return for sanctions relief. The agreement was endorsed by the United Nations Security Council. In 2018, President Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the agreement and restored sanctions. Iran later expanded its nuclear activities, while negotiations repeatedly failed to restore the deal. At the same time, Iran and Israel fought an intensifying shadow war involving cyber attacks, assassinations, sabotage, proxy forces, and strikes across the region. For years, both sides attempted to avoid a full direct war. Eventually, that barrier collapsed. At the time this documentary is being prepared, in July 2026, Iran is involved in a major regional war. According to the Associated Press timeline, the current phase began on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched attacks on Iran. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and other senior officials were killed, and Iran responded with strikes against Israel and American-linked positions across the region. Iran then used its position around the Strait of Hormuz as one of its strongest instruments of pressure. Ceasefires and temporary agreements followed, but repeatedly collapsed. Attacks on ships, Iranian military targets, regional bases, and armed groups continued. As of July 29th, the conflict remained volatile, with further missile attacks, strikes in Iraq, and negotiations over maritime access and the future of the strait. This conflict has revealed something larger than Iran itself. The modern global economy depends on geographic passages that are extremely difficult to replace. Before the present disruption, around 20 million barrels of oil moved through Hormuz each day. Much of it traveled toward China, India, Japan, and South Korea, but the consequences of disruption spread through global prices. Europe faces higher energy and manufacturing costs. Britain faces renewed inflationary pressure. Asian economies face expensive imports. The United States imports less Gulf oil than it once did, but American consumers and companies still pay prices shaped by the global market. No responsible historian can predict exactly how the war will end, but serious economic institutions have outlined the possibilities. A short conflict could produce a severe but temporary energy shock. A prolonged conflict could damage infrastructure, keep shipping costs elevated, weaken global growth, and deepen food insecurity. A continuing low-level confrontation could leave the world trapped between war and peace, with energy prices remaining unstable for years. Those are not mystical predictions from ancient texts. They are scenarios based on shipping capacity, energy dependence, damaged infrastructure, and the brutal human tendency to continue conflicts long after everyone knows they are destructive. Subscribe to Time Layers, where we travel through the layers of history to understand the forces shaping our world today.